Okay. Today we're taking a break from our regular Tefillah Scale to do a staff request, share on ingredient decisions, which is how decisions are made about what should be group one, like what needs hashgacha and what doesn't need hashgacha. I don't think that anybody's going to walk away and say, okay, now I got it, now I'm ready to do it.
Now I got it, now I'm ready to do it.
It's meant to be an overview, and I'll do what I can. Okay, I'm going to split up what I have to say into 3 parts. Okay, and the first is going to be principles, different principles that, in my mind, in taking it through, different principles that we use in making those decisions. You'll see what I mean as I speak about it. The second is we're going to talk about which foods are not kosher. Hopefully that's going to make sense once we get there. Which foods are not kosher. And the last is the kind of knowledge that goes into making decisions about whether something does or doesn't need hashgacha. Okay? Okay, so let's do, first we're going to do principles. Okay, principles first. Okay, first principle is like this. It's our goal to certify food that's kosher l'chatchila. Okay, that's our plan. That's what we want to do. We don't want to give people food that's kosher b'diah. That's the plan.
Without compromise.
No, I'm going to explain myself. We want to give people food that's kosher l'chatchila. That's the plan. But we also, at the same time, mindful of the fact that companies and consumers need certain things. We use the word need in quotations. Need certain things. So saying that everything should be 100% l'chatchila is not what happens. Okay, and our goal is to make food l'chatchila, and I'm going to give you I'm going to explain myself. Give me a second. Okay, when Rabbi Genack likes to say over that when he started working hashgacha, Salvation gave him a direction, and he said to him, "This is your mahalach for what you're doing." He says, "What your job is to make sure that in every supermarket in the United States there's lots of available kosher food at the right standard. It's kosher food available that Yidden all over the United States, now it's already the world, but right over the entire United States, wherever they walk into any supermarket, they find food that's truly kosher. That's what your goal is." He says is, the people who want to eat food that's, so to speak, super kosher, more kosher than that, they want to eat kol v'yisrael, they want to eat yashan, they want to eat, they have special requirements. He says, that's not your tafkid. He says, those people will take care of themselves. They'll find other people to take care of. If they want, you can make food. They make food that's kol v'yisrael. He gives food, hashgacha, but that's not your tafkid. Your goal is that there should be food readily available to people wherever they are across the United States. And that's like what he focuses on. Which is to say is, sometimes, if we would just focus on, there were 100 people who wanted kosher food for themselves, then they may not do things exactly the same way that we do in commercial hashgacha, which is to say there's a certain amount of compromise, that goes into it. Okay, I'll give you an example.
That's for you, not necessarily seriously.
That's everybody. I'll give you an example. You'll see how it's you. Okay. It's accepted in hashgacha. It's accepted that food that comes by ship from the Far East, the way they decide if the cargo hold is kosher, it's a hold. It's a ship that has a big empty room in it, a huge room, into which they fill the product right into that. Okay? And that holds one thing today and the next thing tomorrow. So the way they decide whether that hold is kosher, the way they make that decision is, they look at the last 3 things that were in that hold. If the last 3 things that were in that hold were kosher, then it's good. Then they decide, then the hold is kosher. It does not need to be kosher. Part of why they do that is because every person who puts something into a hold has a surveyor who comes out, and he himself looks at what were the last 3 loads in the ship. Not for Kashrus reasons. If you're putting in gasoline, it doesn't make a difference. Whatever you're putting into it, you want to know what were the last 3 things, and then based on that, you decide whether you do or don't want to put something into that, and the Kashrus people connected to that and said, if the last 3 things that were in there were kosher, then it's kosher. Why did they do that? It's not a koshering. Just because the last 3 things were kosher, Milu V'Iru doesn't work on a hold for whatever variety of reasons. Whether the washing that they do as a koshering is very up in the air, there's a whole book of how to wash things, and not every one of those is a koshering. So why do they do that? Well, what's the reason for that? The reason why they did that is because if there wouldn't be a way to bring oil from the Far East, oil and other things from the Far East to where we are, then lots of really big companies wouldn't get hashgacha because they wouldn't be able to have hashgacha because they wouldn't have oil and other things. And the entire house of cards, the entire structure of kashrus wouldn't function because if those big companies didn't want hashgacha, then they wouldn't ask their suppliers to be kosher. And then other companies that want to make things, they wouldn't be able to get hashgacha because they don't have all the ingredients that they need. Okay, so things are very dependent on things like this decision to allow the use of based on 3 prior cargoes, which is by no means by the books. By no means is it clear enough. That's 100%. The truth is, the food is kosher. The food is kosher because in a ship, if it held 3 prior cargoes that are kosher, then it's for sure ain't a ben yomi. Okay, ships between one load and the next load are ain't a ben yomi. Okay, so it's not to say that the food is not kosher, but is it exactly perfect? Why is it ain't a ben yomi?
Unless you know for sure there's 24.
Because from the time they unload till they reload, they go back out to sea, and then they wash out at sea, and then they come back in. It takes time before you reload again.
Don't verify that 3 prior for kosher. Kosher certified?
Kosher means is things that are not kosher sensitive.
They're not group 1.
Yeah, they were group 1. They were.
Oil?
Yes. No. They were kosher products.
Kosher certified?
No, products that are not kosher sensitive. Products that don't need hashgacha on them. They're inherently kosher, or they had hashgacha, whatever. So they look at them. No, the market, the last 3 loads were kosher. What was the 4th load?
Vegetable oil, which is a kosher ingredient.
No.
You say vegetable oil?
Okay, I'm saying vegetable oil. It's crude vegetable oil there. Crude vegetable oil that does not need hashgacha. It's not processed, refined vegetable oil. It's crude oil. Whatever the things are, it could be the glycerins or gasoline, water, and propane. It could be 3 things that have no shaykhs to food. They are completely kosher. Okay, but that's what they decided on. So is that perfect? There are other problems with the ships. You should know there are other. I'm only telling you the one about the 3 loads. There are other parts of things that go on with ships. There are actually unique hashgachas that won't use those things, but not only is everybody using it specifically because you use that oil in your product, but the indirect effect and benefit we all feel. That is to say, because Procter & Gamble could be kosher, that has a domino effect on a zillion other companies that are supplying them, that are buying their products, and all those people that are working at kosher, which is to say, 75 years ago, there wasn't hashgacha. There wasn't easily available like it is now. Now you walk into a company and you say, you want to be kosher? It's not such a big deal. It's often an easy job.
Actually check the food, and if a ship pulls up and makes the food one, the last thing they said was glycerin. 2 times they'll tell you, no, switch around.
If it's coming under hashgacha, yeah. When things that come under hashgacha are only approved if the last 3 cargoes were kosher. The last 3 cargoes were kosher. Yeah, and it's not you. To an outsider, it sounds like, how does someone check on those things? Every hold has that. It's part of the bill of lading for a ship hold is what were the last 3 cargoes because the company itself cares about it. It's like a standard in the industry. There is a mashgiach there to allow loading into the thing. It's approved by somebody. It's being approved. But for the company, that's a standard thing. Show me the last 3 loads. It's a standard thing. There's a shaver goes out there. He does the checking, blah, blah, blah. It's all that part of standard for the industry, and the hashgachas have latched into that. They use that same system. Okay? So now, in this kind of thing, whenever there's such a thing like a compromise like this, like in deciding what's a group 1 or a standard like this, then the truth is that over the years, as the hashgacha world grows, and there are many more things with ingredients that have hashgacha on them, those compromises that were made may not be necessary anymore. That's the truth. The truth is that with time, we could really pull back on some of those things. I'm not talking about 3 loads specifically. There was actually a big movement to try to get rid of that a couple of years ago. But there's
didn't work.
Right, a community movement, and say that it should be completely kosher and do it like, but so to speak, what you would imagine it should be do by the books. Okay, there was a big community movement. People were trying to get the hashgachas to change. But so the truth is that with time, you really should make changes. Some of these things that were done 75, 50 years ago, it need to be redone, and maybe it's a slow process. It doesn't happen too quickly, for sure. Okay. Number 2. So that was the first one. Our first principle, what I call it. Okay. Second is, the hashgachas, at least in the United States, are very intertwined. Okay? When something comes in with someone else's hashgacha on it, we take it without asking questions. I don't mean every hashgacha, but the major hashgachas that we deal with, when it comes in with that hashgachas on it, we say, no problem, and we just take it as is. When they take our product, they take it as is. Okay? So, that is to say that there's a consensus that everyone follows certain rules, even though I might not agree with them. Okay, I follow what's generally accepted as kosher, and they follow what we think is kosher because everyone's relying on everybody else, and hopefully, the like Beisham and Bishil, that they could tell each other when they're not doing what everybody else is doing. Okay, so people should know that they're getting something that's a little not up to what their standard is. But by and large, we don't always do what we think. We also do what everybody thinks. Okay? For better or for worse. Okay. Number 3 touches on what Levi just mentioned, which is we have more hakpadas about things that we give hashgacha to than what we would take as a group 1. Okay, it's sort of roughly based on something that's in the Tshuva in English Moshe. Moshe says they talk to him about a certain using a certain item, and he says, well, listen, the company's not Jewish, and for them it's completely mutter to do what they're doing. He says in his famous words for Kashrus people, he says it's mechur that to let a company do something and give hashgacha to it if you yourself wouldn't do it. So it has a lot to do with, like, for example, we would never let a company put a tiny amount of treif into something if it was on the hashgacha. We wouldn't say, it's a tiny bit, it's going to be bottle. If that was coming in as a group 1, it was coming in as, even if we knew that they used that ingredient at the supplier in front of them, we would let it go. Okay, we would let it go because it's product coming in as kosher. Okay, like think about when you make alcohol or alcoholic beverages. Okay, they all have in them yeast and enzymes that are used in that process. If we were giving hashgacha to it, we would make sure that all those ingredients were kosher. Okay, when it comes into our plant, we don't care. We just say, we know that it's in that plant. We know that the other people are using it. You can't make it without, microorganisms. It doesn't work. You can't get it. So, but we ignore it because that's probably kosher. It's good likely that it's bottled anyhow. So we ignore it because really the food is kosher. But if it was in our plant, we wouldn't ignore it. In our plant, it would have to be 100%. Okay. Number 3. We don't. I'm sorry. Number 4. Okay. Number 4. Just keep everybody awake, right? Okay. We only. This is by the books, which is we only worry about things that are reasonable and common and normal that are supposed to happen. When there's something unusual and strange that goes on, it's just because somebody calls up, I once saw this and this thing, that doesn't mean that that's the end of the world because of that. Okay? And as an example of it is corn syrup. Okay, this is an LLC from the OU. Okay, here's some bigger. Okay, this corn syrup is made in Thailand, and it's dairy. Okay, it's the corn syrup that they make is dairy. Okay, so you like to tell you, like, oh my gosh, we have corn syrup that's dairy. Okay, but just because this is under hashgacha,
There's dairy equipment?
no. It's dairy.
That's what I'm saying.
I don't. I suspect that they make. I don't even know what it's from. I don't know.
It's corn syrup. I don't know.
Maybe the enzymes are dairy. It could be the enzymes are coming from. They're in Thailand. Maybe they're coming from Australia, from New Zealand. And the enzymes. I don't know. It's not important really for me to know why it's there.
What did you see?
It's not a mistake. It's not a mistake. No, they like to tell everybody about it. It's not a secret. They tell people about this. That you think that things could be whatever. They make propylene glycol. I didn't put it. They make propylene glycol out of glycerin now. Okay, there's a company. It's also a certified company that makes that. So, what do you say?
Which it uses essentially corn syrup.
Which is so the fact that there's one unusual case where someone's doing something like this doesn't mean that we therefore say it doesn't hashgacha. Okay, that's not. I don't think it's a compromise. That's what they didn't tell you. Also, you don't have to worry about far-fetched things. Okay. And the last thing is, most items. If you think about think about the world, think about the things that are out there. Most things are kosher. Okay. Think about most things that you make food out of are kosher. Okay. Vegetables and petroleum and all kinds of things. Things that are out there. Most things are kosher. Which is to say, since most things are kosher, it's easier to think about whether something is a group 1. In a certain sense, it's easier to say, I'm going to think about all the ways you could use treif ingredients as a way of figuring out, could you have made this thing from treif? Rather than trying to say, how did you make it? Sometimes it's easier to think about, how could it be treif? If I know what could be treif, now I can say, okay, now is this within the range of those things that could be treif? Okay, the class of things that are treif is smaller than what could be kosher. So by focusing on the treif, it's easier it gives a certain perspective that makes it easier than by focusing on the kosher. An example. When you make, back to alcoholic beverages, a byproduct of that is something called fusel oil. Okay, fusel oils are all the parts of the fermentation that are not good for you. Okay, or they're not desirable. Okay? And in a someone who's making alcohol, distills those out. They separate those pieces out. The fusel oils, the not good part, they separate it out. Okay? It's what the moonshiners can't do. Right? So they can't do. Okay? The guys who made moonshine would hurt themselves because they weren't sophisticated enough to get that stuff out. Okay? It's part of all those fusel oils. It's part of that whole bunch. Now the fusel oils that are taken out, they don't get thrown out. They don't necessarily get thrown out because the company will then further break those down into individual parts, and there are some valuable chemicals in them. Okay, one of the things that are in there is butyric acid. Okay, butyric acid. Well, you can make alcohol out of wine, out of grapes, which would be, of course, also would be stam yain. You can make that. Well, if so, butyric acid, which is a byproduct from fusel oil, is therefore suspicious that maybe it should be treif. Okay, well, that's what you might think. Oh, that's So that you might be suspicious of that. The truth is that's really not considered concern. This is connected to the last one, which is separating out the butyric acid out of the fusel oil is a very complicated process. And it's really easy to get butyric acid from many other places. So butyric acid, particularly if it's not natural, is a group 1. Okay? But that is, I thought about what you would, you think about what would you do with wine, and what would you do with all the products that you make out of wine. Wine is treif. Wine is treif. What can you do with wine? You can make it into alcohol, and you can make it into vinegar, and you can make it in fusel oils, and then you have to go, okay, what would someone do with a fusel oil? And they could have made butyric acid. Now, in this case, the butyric acid is not treif. We don't worry about butyric acid. But knowing that butyric acid can come from wine is a connection to say maybe butyric acid should be suspected and may not be a group 1. Okay?
So what's the answer?
We don't worry about it because it's not commercially viable to make butyric acid out of fusel oil. It's not kedai. Okay? The fusel oil, first of all fusel oil is not treif. Lots of fusel oil comes from other grains. But even if it is, it's not kedai for them to pull it out of the fusel oil, the butyric acid. They get butyric acid from other places.
Okay? It's easier to get from other sources.
It's easier to get from other places. Someone who used a natural butyric acid would be suspicious. Someone had a natural something with butyric acid, it would be more suspicious. Where did he get it from? He probably got that from fusel.
From the wine is called natural butyric acid.
No.
No, why not?
Yes, it would be called natural. There's an automatic that if it's natural, it came from wine. But if it came from wine, it would be natural. Yes, it would be natural. Yes, that would be natural. As opposed to if you made it.
As opposed to synthetics.
Yeah.
As opposed to
synthetics. Okay. So now that we went through these principles, now I'm going to spend some time on.
Are these the same principles for face off?
I can't answer that question. Think about it. Caught me off guard. I have to think about that. Okay.
What is the Kashrus of 2 black feet?
in the same.
Okay, that's a deep question. Okay, so we're going to split up foods being not kosher into 4 parts. Okay, and they are the foods that are. I don't remember how my slides go. Okay, the foods that are inherently not kosher. I'm going to take the 4 parts. I don't remember how the slides go. I'll get to the slides in a second. Okay. There are foods that are inherently not kosher. There are foods that are derived from something that's not kosher. There are foods that are processed on kalim that was used for not kosher. And last is everything's kosher about it except something about the actual process that makes it not kosher. Okay? What did you say?
Why is it doing the equation?
What it means is everything's fine about this thing, but it was made on treif kalim. There's something about, let's say, bishlag. There's something about the process that makes the food not kosher.
The good thing is not certified.
Does it make it not kosher?
Huh?
Why does it make it not kosher?
For us, for the consumer, it's not kosher.
No, I'm trying to. We're trying to see how would I decide if a food is kosher or not kosher. So whether it's kosher or not, there's 4 ways. I'm breaking into these 4 groups of how it could be not kosher, or if it's not missing any of those, if all those are okay, then I'm good. Then the food is kosher. Okay. So I don't remember. Yeah. Okay. The foods that are inherently not kosher. Okay. The first is meat and poultry. Okay. The etzem, of course. Meat and poultry really are kosher, and really they're just missing a process. They need shchita and malicha and all kinds of other things. But for our purposes, commercially, we treat meat as treif. Okay? There's like really treif meat. Inherently, like pork is inherently treif. but regular beef is not treif. But for our purposes, we treat it as treif because out in the world, what everyone's buying meat is not kosher.
Or wine?
What? I'm getting to that. No, that's a process. I'm coming to that. Okay, fish. Okay, fish is, again, there's not enough. Lots of fish are kosher. Doesn't need anything done to it, but lots of fish are not kosher. By and large, if you're looking at fish in a commercial setting, it's probably also treated as not kosher, but not necessarily. It depends on the situation. Okay, but it's potentially inherently not kosher. If you have a treif fish, a catfish is inherently treif. Okay, bugs are treif. Okay, so bugs come up in things like carmine, and it's mamish like a crushed up bug. Bugs come up in vegetables, but not only do they come up in vegetables like as in a restaurant setting or if somebody wants hashgach on that, but we had not so long ago an application, somebody wanted us to certify herbs made in Egypt, okay, and the way it was dried herbs in most of the world, the way, like in the United States, and you want to make dried herbs, you take the herbs, you put them onto a tray, you stick them into an oven, and an hour later you come back, you have dried herbs, like what you have in your pantry. Those are dried herbs, and basically they're done in an oven. Okay? It's accepted that when you dry something mechanically, you dry it with heat, that has the same din as if you dried it for 12 months. The din is if a bug sits for 12 months, it's dried out and it's mutter. The place can say that if you dried it out mechanically, you put it into an oven and you dried it out, you got to the same point as drying out over 12 months, and it's considered mutter also. Okay? So that's why most of our herbs don't need hashgacha, because we don't worry about the bugs that are in there, because the bugs have been dried out mechanically. Basically, the herbs are 12, as if they're 12 months old. Okay? But in some countries, like in Egypt, they take herbs and they just lay them out on the floor. If I remember correctly, it even said it on the application, or maybe on the company's website, that they take the herbs, it's boiling hot outside, it never rains, they take the stuff, they lay it down in the field, and then come back 3 days later, and it's dried out, it's ready to be sold. I don't, what do you say?
Any bugs come in from that?
I'm not worried about the bugs that come in then. I'm worried about what about the bugs that we did when we took it off the ground. So it wasn't 8 to 12 months. It could be more problems. I'm not up to that part. I can't even get to first base. Okay, so we once talked about this. Not so clear why we take them as group one. Why are we taking them as group one when there are countries like this that do this? Okay, that's not for today's discussion. But I'm saying there's such a thing. There are bugs out there that we have to worry about. Okay? And within bugs, we'll say there are some bee products also that are not kosher. Okay. Okay. And last is Arla and Shvius. Most times we don't think about Arla because Suffolk, Arla, and Chutzars is mutter. So if I have fruit coming from California and I don't know if it's Arla or not, Arla for the first 3 years you can't eat the fruit. If I don't know if it's Arla or not, I don't have to worry about it. Suffolk, Arla is mutter and Chutzars. But when stuff comes from Eretz Yisrael, then I do have to worry about Arla. Suffolk, Arla, and Eretz Yisrael is asur. And Shvius, we're not talking about what makes it to be considered Suffolk Arla, but on certain things it's not. It's actually not. There are charts. We talked about it once before. I know, but we talked about it. What something would be inherently treif. That's what we're talking about. We're going to get to that in a second. Okay. So just quickly about Shemitah, vegetables from Shemitah are asur. They're svichen. Fruits from Shemitah are technically mutter, but they have kedusha shvius. So commercially, we wouldn't let them into something because all the restrictions of kedusha shvius would essentially mean we couldn't use it for kedusha shvius. Okay, so these are the kinds of things that are inherently not kosher. The opposite, so to speak, aside from the potatoes and things that grow in the ground, is petrochemicals. Okay? Petrochemicals is a whole class of things that we get out there that are made from petroleum. Okay, petroleum is kosher. Okay, inherently good. Next, derivatives. These are things that it's not the treif itself, it's not a piece of meat itself or a bug itself, but a thing that derived from that. Okay, which is, I'll give you a few examples. Gelatin. Okay, when you take animal hides or often hides or bones, one part of the hide is this material called gelatin. So you get rid of everything else. Essentially, you destroy everything else, leaving you behind with that gelatin. So it's also like this was. Okay. The next.
So it really is halachically considered to be that thing itself, right?
Right, but it's a step down. But it's essentially the same thing.
Step down means that this process is isolated.
No, not step down. It's not. It doesn't say on the side of it beef. Okay, it's not beef. It says gelatin. Okay, so it's a step. It's not. Any little smart. You want to call it? Okay. Now, this is a new picture I got from somebody, but we've talked about this before, and that is like this. When you have oil or fat, this molecule, you see if there is an oil or a fat molecule, same thing. And what is it? On the left side, this is a glycerin. This is glycerin that has 3 places to attach to it, and these are fatty acids. Okay, so there's one glycerin. Every oil or fat has glycerin that's identical for all of them, and it has 3 fatty acids. Which fatty acid is attached to the glycerin will tell us what the properties of that are. The fatty acids attached to olive oil and the fatty acids attached to corn oil are not the same thing. That's why olive oil and corn oil aren't the same, and that's why animal fat and canola oil are not the same thing. It depends on which fatty acids are attached to them. Okay? So what companies do is they use a really big piece of equipment that's under pressure and very, very high temperatures, and they split this molecule in half. The glycerin goes that way, and the fatty acids go that way. Okay, they split this molecule into molecules. They call it a splitter. They break the molecule into parts. So if the glycerin comes from animal fat,
Is that only through heat? Is that
yes,
what does it?
heat and pressure. Yeah.
And pressure.
So if no, it's not with a hammer. No, if they do that, thank you for measles. If they do it at if they make it from animal fat, then the glycerin is trace. The fatty acids like stearic acid, you know that stearic acid can come from animal fat. That's because stearic acid is a common fatty acid found in animal fat. It's found in vegetable oils also, but it's one of the 3 that are very common in animals, and the 3 are. I'm going to say it in a minute. I forgot. It's on my next piece of paper. So if it's one of those, then it's a derivative of an animal product, and it's trace. Okay.
Before the splitting, you can tell what the source is of that molecule. But
Before the splitting, it's very much so.
after the splitting, you can't tell if there's some because the fatty acids are removed.
Because the glycerin is, well, I'm going to mention in a second, the glycerin gets refined. Before it's refined, you might be able to tell where it came from, because it has impurities to it. But refining means get rid of the impurities, and now it's just plain
Before they
glycerin.
split it, it has the fatty acids, you still can't tell.
No, but it has the fatty acids, you very much can
Why
tell.
is the splitting?
No, after you split it, now the glycerin's by itself. But the glycerin has impurities to it.
Even after you split it, you could tell?
You may be able to tell in
You
the...
tell if there's no fatty acids.
Because it has impurities. The impurities may be some fatty acids, whatever's in there still, it's impure. Once you purify it, then no, it's just going to be plain old glycerin.
Right, so no lab could determine how that glycerin originated.
As far as we understand, as far as I know. Once it's glycerin, you can't tell.
Chemically identical.
What's the original material that you take the glycerin from?
Oil or fat.
Fat.
Oil or fat. Oil and fat are on the same...
Separate, you have glycerin on one side and
Fatty acids on the other side. The glycerin has 3 attachment places to it, so there are 3 fatty acids to it. So once you separate those, then you have one side glycerin, one side fatty acid. Okay. 2 other things. Fish oil could be chafe. Is a derivative from something. And then fermentations. Okay, what's a fermentation? Fermentation means is you take some kind of a microorganism, some kind of yeast or bacteria or whatever, something tiny that grows, and you put it into a vat of something, and then something that it can eat or that it can live off of. And now the bacteria, the microorganism, either makes more of itself, because you like the microorganism itself, you get more of it, like you make more yeast, so you feed the yeast something and it makes more and more yeast, or you want the microorganism to make something else. You want it to make xanthan gum. Okay, so if you want it to make xanthan gum, you put a certain microorganism into a big vat of something for it to live on, and it creates xanthan gum. Okay, so either get more of itself or something special that you're trying to get. You want to get citric acid. You put it in and come back tomorrow, and you have, instead of a thing of sugar, you have a thing of citric acid. Okay? So microorganisms are particular as to what you have to put into there to help them do their thing. Okay? By and large, they just have sugar, glucose. By and large, that's what they take, it's just sugar. But there are some that have all kinds of special diets, okay, including animal parts. Okay, there may be all kinds of things put into there for them to live on. Again, by and large, fermentations are not a kashrus issue, because by and large they tend to be just plain sugar. But they have all kinds of other chazarai in it, so things that are made by fermentation need hashgacha. Now, back to our first principle that we sometimes make compromises. Okay, well, I'm telling you that you take a microorganism and you throw it into the vat of whatever you're trying to make. Okay, the microorganism that you have, it comes in a little cryovat. What? Right. Well, I'm past the petri dish. It's in some kind of a little cryovac container, okay, that has in it the microorganism floating in, actually usually in glycerin, okay, floating in something, okay. When you have a company that makes those, that produces the companies that actually go out into the wild and find the microorganisms, the companies that hold on to them and sell you the originals, okay, that from which you can grow more of this stuff, those companies don't have hashgacha. The original companies, those back there that are selling them, they don't have hashgacha. We only give hashgacha from what's called the flask and on, okay, from a certain stage in production.
They don't have hashgacha?
Right. They don't have hashgacha. So like for instance,
culture companies that
the culture a step past the original places don't have. Like for example, there's a whole to-do going on that there's one of the items that people make is made from something called cordyceps. Okay, cordyceps comes from
Starts with the C or a K?
with a C. Comes from a caterpillar in China. Not China, in Tibet. Yeah, maybe that was a political statement. In Tibet, and it comes from, they collect these, something that grows, the parasite that grows out of a caterpillar. Okay, and it's actually an amazing thing. Just for your curiosity, it's a whole class of things called cordyceps. But a cordyceps grows from there, and there's one hashgacha. There used to be more than one, but there's now one that gives hashgacha to things made from cordyceps. Okay, and it's like, now in this case, nobody gives hashgacha on the place that makes the original culturing, I believe, but everybody knows, in this case, where the cordyceps come from. Okay, so when we don't know where the original microorganism came from to make xanthan gum, that's behind a wall that we don't cross. Okay, that we don't have any connection to. But in the cordyceps case, we actually did. So there was quite a to-do, because here these hashgacha, giving hashgacha essentially on this a propagated cordyceps, when guys, it came from a caterpillar. So that was what I'm saying. It just brings to light that not knowing what's going on behind those closed doors, behind a certain level, means that we really don't know what we're getting. That's the truth. Now, and
it's not trying to get hashgacha to go to that company and say,
right. Those companies have refused to take hashgacha, probably for good reason. And things are more complicated because those things are seemingly a davar ha'mayim also. So it's quite complicated because I take a vat of sugar, I throw in a spoonful of something, and when I come back tomorrow, the vat of sugar turned into citric acid. So that thing that I threw in it did something, right? It magically turned. It made a very dramatic change to it. It's a machametz. Okay, machametz. If that'll make you feel better. The same Mishnah says machametz also. Okay,
it's like worse than Miami.
Right. So when you think of Miami, you think of it solidified. It's the other Mishnah is machametz also. Machametz also. Same thing. That point is, it takes something. Yesterday was sugar. Today it's xanthan gum. Whoa, that's not the same thing. It made a dramatic change. Okay. So, okay. Next. So these are the things that are derivatives. Okay. So till now, these are things that
you might say the heter is based on.
Heter is based on
ignorance.
No, Shalish Palmer, what is the right? So
why
is the mutter? Why is
I'm not sure. I can't answer that question.
What does someone realize?
It's probably 1,000 times over.
Is there a free thinking?
That doesn't help for this.
When did they start to realize?
Doesn't help for this. It only helps for special isurim. Yeah, for the so when they realize it, they realized it.
Years ago.
They realized it at the same time they realized how important it is. What I mean is like this. Imagine what would happen if I told you today, from now on there's no more kosher citric acid. None, zero. Okay? How many companies wouldn't have hashgacha if there was no more citric acid anymore? An awful lot we have. If I told you there was no corn syrup also has enzymes in it. All these things, all that whole industry, or anything made through fermentation they would be out of business. Well, guess what would happen to all of hashgacha? Okay, so
why does it make a difference?
Why? So now in this case, it's harder for me to explain it to you because in this case, I don't. Because in this case, I can't. No. When it came to the ships, we said it's mutter because it really is mutter. It's the evidence mutter. Okay, so there it's easier to say, well, it was a shasat chat kediyah dummy. It's a shasat chat. We want to have kosher food, so kediyah dummy, even though it's kediyah, it's going to be mutter anyhow. Over here, I would need to find you a better explanation. I don't yet have a good explanation. Well, that's true. Right them or not, that's true. Right them are kosher. Right them are kosher. That's true. So, okay, maybe we're following right. Right is not bad.
You say maybe one that you know it's not kosher.
So the cordyceps brought out the point because the cordyceps, everybody knows where cordyceps come from. They come from these caterpillars. So, okay. Okay. So the next two, these two are things that everyone gets. Why they're not kosher. The next two, you have to be a little more sophisticated or a little more rabbinic to understand. Okay, next is things that were made on treif equipment. Okay, so what I mentioned to you beforehand, the glycerin and the fatty acids is an example of that. Okay, there are 3 fatty acids that commonly come from animal: palmitic, stearic, and oleic come from animal. There's a whole bunch of other ones that almost always come from vegetable. Here, caproic and caprylic, pelargonic, capric, lauric, and myristic. Okay, they always come from vegetable. Okay, the reason why they need hashgacha is because they're made on the same kalim as the animal fat products are. Which is to say, you split animal fat and then you split vegetable oil. You could do that on the same kalim.
Did you say palmitic is from animal?
No, I'll say palmitic is from animal. Yes, is from animal.
From animal?
Yes. So it's not always from animal. There's lots of kosher palmitic, right? But these ones. But even if we know that it comes from vegetable oil, we know that lauric acid invariably comes from vegetable oil. But when lauric acid comes from vegetable oil, but the same splitter that was used for these was used for the animal, was used for the vegetable. And guess what? After you take the fatty acids out of the splitter, the fatty acids have to be distilled more, because you have this big collection of fatty acids all mixed together. If you want just the pelargonic, okay, you just want pelargonic pulled out, you have to distill it to separate these ones from those ones. Okay, that still is used for kosher and treif also. Again, it's a still, you dump into it a collection of fatty acids, a collection of it, and it separates them out into these ones and those ones. Okay, so even if it's a vegetable glycerin, well, vegetable glycerin and animal glycerin can get purified on the same kalim, very hot, plenty of heat, or to distill the one fatty acid out of the other ones, same kind of kalim also. Okay, so here it's not a shiloh of the thing itself. We know the thing comes from vegetable, but even though it inherently is kosher, but the kalim that it comes from are a shiloh. Okay. And that's the reason why we say that vegetable oil needs hashgacha. We find vegetable oil needs hashgacha. It's not because we question that the corn oil is actually made out of corn. It's that the corn oil goes through processes to purify it. The common one that you hear it's called to deodorize it, okay, which means it's to deodor like a deodorant. It takes rid of your odor. So deodorize it takes fragrances out of the oil that people don't like. So to deodorize it is essentially a distillation. They distill out the oil. Essentially, that's what they do. Okay, it's called deodorize. What?
RBD.
Right, that's correct. The D for RBD stands for deodorize. Correct. Okay, now all this, everything that we're talking about, kalim, everything we talk about kalim is something that only relates to when we give hashgacha for food. When we give, not today's topic, but when we give hashgacha for things that are for non-food use, like for toilet bowl cleaner, the things that are not food use, we don't care about kalim. We make sure that the ingredients are inherently kosher. We don't care if the ingredients are made on treif kalim. I'm not saying it. But the things that are made on treif kalim, we don't pay attention to for non-food use. Okay, that's not today's topic. I'm just throwing it out there. Okay. Now, we all know that we're very careful, as I just told you, how careful we are that things have to be made on kosher kalim. Okay? But there are 3 exceptions to that rule. Okay? And the 3 exceptions to that rule, I'll blame, for no better other thing than on my first principle, which was that sometimes we have to do things in order to keep the kashrus going. Okay? So there's going to be these 3 examples that I'm going to give you of cases where we are not makbid on kalim, are examples that, for lack of something better, for each one of them I'll tell you a reason why in din we could ignore it, but it's not a first choice. If you would design this from scratch, then you wouldn't have chosen to do like this. Okay? And the first one is steam systems. Okay? If we know a food is made in the factory with this kosher and treif, okay, then and they return condensate from the treif side to the kosher side, we won't let that. We said please come back from the treif side, and you won't let you return steam. Okay, what happens if you taking something that's a group 1, and you know that in that factory, then they are or they could be returning steam from the treif side of the factory to the kosher side of the factory. We ignore that. Okay? We don't pay attention to it. We don't say, oh, maybe it's not a group 1 because maybe the steam is being brought back from that side of the factory to this side of the factory. If we were making it, we would be makbid. So why do we take it as group 1? Why don't we worry that maybe in that factory they have a problem with steam? It's sort of an automatic problem that there could be. The ingredients could be kosher, but what about the steam system in that place? If something is a group 1, that means to say is there's no questions about that thing. It's kosher without hashgacha. Wait a second, but maybe it's made in a plant where the steam system in that plant is being used for treif also. It doesn't mean anything. It doesn't mean anything that you make.
a lot of this stuff's really made exclusive with ingredient company. It's exclusive for whatever they make. I mean, the Kosher place not going to make a chalitza. We're going to make Kosher. There's Kosher. So,
Okay. Rabbi Moskowitz is the RC for a sugar company. They make liquid sugar, and the same company makes animal products. And
scratch.
They cook animal. They cook beef or pork. I forgot which one. I think maybe it's pork. And the steam from the trade side. If not that we were there, the steam from the trade side would be used to cook the sugar on the kosher side. Okay. So what I mean is we ignore that pasus. So now, no. But that's in case you're curious. That company has Bishul Yisrael ham. In case if you want. that we advertise that for people who, if you want to eat treif but you don't want your children to marry shitza, then you buy Bishul Yisrael ham. So
I'm still not understanding. You're saying that Group 1
does not take into consideration the fact that the steam that was used to produce this thing might have been treif. We think about the ingredients, we think about different things. We don't think about, well, maybe the steam system that was used to heat up that product was treif.
Even though that Group 1 was using that food.
Right, even though it's been used in food, yeah, the non-food was just a side point. We're on back to regular food.
You say we don't take that Kashrus into account.
Correct. Now, why do we take? Why Lamai said shouldn't we take it into account? So one is, like David said, most times it's usually not a problem. Okay, it's not a common thing that steam system is a problem. Even when there actually is a steam system used for kosher and treif, often cases the evidence fine anyhow. All kinds of cheshbonis with bittul and things like that. It's usually okay. And the truth is that the machlokes rishonim, when the bleas go through the doif nehakli, Shulchan Aruch says to be machmer on that. But we're machmer on that l'chapchila, but it is a suffix where the bleeds go through to the other side of the steam system. And in practice, no one ever tastes bleeds coming through on the other side. So between this whole collection of things like that, we ignore, when we're thinking about whether something's a group 1, no one pays attention to whether the steam system is a problem. Okay, number 2.
But if you know from a specific place that it is, we would take it, right?
Yeah, but it's a group 1. You see, but we take it as a group 1, ignoring the fact that that's possible. Okay, number 2.
That's possible enough. It's enough of a possibility. It's not
right. Even if it would be enough of a possibility that it otherwise would have raised an issue, yes.
We don't monitor the transportation. It's the same thing.
I can have 3 things. Give me a chance. I'm only up to the first one. I'm on the second one. Okay, the second is, okay, chemicals. Let's say I have methylbutyrate. Okay, say it's group 1. Okay, methylbutyrate is a reaction between methanol and butyric acid. Okay, and I made methylbutyrate. Okay, where did that reaction happen? What did they do that? That someone didn't just pour 2 things into a bucket. Someone put them into a kettle, into a reactor, and they cooked them up, or they heated them, or who knows how they did that to make that. The CRC gives hashgacha to a company that does all these kind of reactions. Okay, all kinds of interesting reactions. Okay, and in that company, it's got a ridiculous amount of sensitive ingredients. It happens to be we give hashgacha, and it's all kosher parv. That's what happens to be. That's how we set it up. But there's 100 other companies in the rest of the world that are doing these kind of reactions. They're not all kosher. Of course they're not. And the ingredients that they use are treif. So we're saying methylbutyrate. I know how you make methylbutyrate. Methylbutyrate, not a problem. It's group 1. Really? What do you mean you know how to make it? Didn't you realize you're making the pot? You don't just, it's not a magician. You don't just make this in the air. You got to do it in a container. We're making that container with heat. Then why are you worried about the kalim with that? How can it be group 1? What happens to the kalim part of it? So the answer is, the excuse is, it's very likely that each one of these things is next time come to the next one. Remember, this is not this is not a cookie company that today the cookies are treif, tomorrow the kosher, that the tamim are similar. These are chemicals that are very different from each other. And the companies are very makbid to clean up and maybe even kasher in between. They do a thorough clean between one another, again, because this is chemicals that are very sensitive one to the next. And good chance the companies, a lot of these places use glass line reactors. We assume glass does not have bleeds in it. And okay, so there's all kinds of possibilities as to why it should not be a problem. But is it exactly how we would want it? Is it exactly, if we were giving hashgacha, we wouldn't go for that. Okay, but
you know these chemicals are used in food.
And they're used in food. Yeah. These are all for foods we're talking about. But methylbutyrate would have been considered group 1, even though the place making the methylbutyrate yesterday could have made ethyl stearate. And the stearate, whoa, it has stearic acid in it. The same thing a half an hour ago was making something with stearic acid in it. We're ignoring that.
So really, what's the difference between a chemical and a non-chemical? All these cheshbonis.
So the cheshbonis are a little less significant, less plausible when it's a non-food, and the big difference is, how important is it? How important is it for the world that this brand of cookies be kosher? You say, I won't give you hashgacha unless it's kosher in between, or that ingredient. How important is it that there should be chemicals available for companies to make food out of?
Ingredients also typically buffalo that any food are going into?
No, not at all. They're about flavor. There are all kinds of chemicals, all kinds of things, whatever they're doing. So and here's an example of weighing the value of this thing. How much does that contribute to making hashgacha possible in the United States versus what's the possibility of it really being treif? And that in that judgment, it won out to say ignore the camel. Okay? That's what I'm describing to you. And the last is transportation. Okay? Food comes in boats, rail cars, and in tanker trucks. That's supposed to be a tanker truck. Tankers, totes, drums, all kinds of stuff. And if it's under hashgacha, we make sure that it's done correctly, that it has to be kosher. If it's not under hashgacha, if it's group 1, we ignore that. The fact we know that it came in a truck. I mean, come on, it didn't just come out of the ground and jump into the factory. It came on some kind of a trailer and a rail car and a boat and a barge, and who knows how it showed up in all these places. And we ignore that possibility when it's group 1. Now, so what's it?
Hot oils?
Yeah.
Not only hot oils at once, but
Not hot. It could be cold. That comes with Kashrus, please. It could be hot. Kashrus is not as serious. That's correct. Kashrus is not as serious because it's Ein Ben Yomai. It's always Ein Ben Yomai by the time it comes out. So there's those kind of cheshbonos. So other things that have to go hot. Yeah. Would we get it as a group 1? Crude coconut oil. Okay. Coconut oil. It's not a liquid at room temperature. It would be considered group 1. It has to be heated. You can't transport it as a at room temperature because it would be solid. You wouldn't be able to get out of the truck. So the what's the cheshbon? Well, in some of these cases, there are specific heterim, which is in a tanker truck, the bleed is always bottled into the food. It's always bottled. The math works out is always bottled. In a rail car, it's always Ein Ben Yomai. In a ship, it's always Ein Ben Yomai. Okay, so there are cheshbon. This is why it should be okay. And there's always the stam can and Ein Ben Yomai. How do I know what was there beforehand? Okay, but again, these are 3 examples where we would allow something as a group 1 and think we would consider it kosher as is, even though the kalim seem to pose just questions. And last, we're winding down, guys. Don't fall asleep on me now. Last is process. Okay, that is to say, these are things that the ingredients are 100% kosher. They're made on kosher kalim. All those things are fine, but there's something about the way it was made that makes it to be not kosher. Okay, and I'm going to tell you this bunch of things that I'm going to show you. But the point is really that this you have to think of when you say, is the food kosher? Could it have this in it that would make it not kosher? And then, we'll go through it. Okay, I mentioned to you for meat and poultry because it needs shechita. Okay, food that needs bishmachim. Okay, we wouldn't let somebody use potato dices. Okay, because potato dices are diced potatoes, cooked in water, past Michael Ben Drusoi, and they'll be bishlakim. So there's nothing treif about it. The potatoes are kosher. The kalim that are used are only made from meat and potato dices on it. There's nothing treif in there. There are actually little possibilities of treif, okay? But basically there's nothing treif in there, but the reason why it's not, we wouldn't accept it as group 1 is because of bishlakim. Okay? Gvinasakim, okay? If you want to use whey, well, why does whey need to have hashgacha? Well, because it could come from cheese, that the cheese was not Gvinas Yisrael, okay? Or casein, which is a type of, essentially, it's a type of cheese, okay? So the reason why it needs hashgacha, there's nothing treif about it. The whey is just made out of milk. There's nothing treif about it, except for the fact that it needed to be Gvinas Yisrael, okay? Chol. Okay, now we give hashgacha to chol stam, but there's such a thing as chol out there, okay? The way our position, that if it comes from certain countries, like India, then we would treat it as chol akum. Okay, we wouldn't treat it as chol. We can give it the heter of chol stam. Not everybody gets that, but we would treat that as. So the milk we're presuming is kosher, but it's not kosher because of the chol akum shaboy. Stam yayin. It's a process. The grapes are kosher, but when you make grapeseed extract or you make raisin juice concentrate, or you make just grape juice, what's treif about it is that it has a question of the way it was made because of stam yayin. Chametz of Pesach didn't fit on the line the whole thing. One of our favorite companies. Okay, that makes Chametz of Pesach. What they missed is they didn't sell the Chametz of Pesach, and they owned it is what messed it up. Hafashas Chal. I couldn't think of an example of where something not having Hafashas Chal would cause a problem, but I guess potentially could. Okay, and
what?
example where an ingredient would come in and we wouldn't take it, we otherwise would take it except for the fact that it didn't have a fresh challah.
Cookie pieces, I don't know.
Cookie dough, what would we think? We take cookie dough without hashgacha? And so we would have gotten caught before that. And it could be, you're right, if it was cookie dough coming from a Jewish company, there would be an extra reason to not take it because of this, but seemingly you'd get caught up before you got to that point. Okay, and the last is true Meiser. We have citrus oils that come from Eretz Yisrael and our famous watermelon seed company. For whatever reason, it seems that watermelon seeds come from Eretz Yisrael. They're a big exporter of watermelon seeds.
Get them off the floor.
Okay, that's one opinion. So these are things. Since someone didn't do our first Shul Shemaiah, that's what makes it kosher. Okay, so for some of these things, it so happens that for some reason in these things there are more disagreements between hashgachas about how they treat things. Okay, there are hashgachas that have different standards for how they make Gvinis Yisrael. I didn't put onto here, but there's different standards for whether fish, kirvei dogim, have to have simanim or don't have to have simanim on them. Okay, there's the standards for what I mentioned, the chol Yisrael of chol vakum. Okay, so over here, not everybody agrees on what makes something okay or not okay. Okay, and the last, this is not really connected, but sort of is that you have to just remember that possible chol is not kosher. Okay, so something that's milk can't go into a power plant. Okay, that's like a process kind of. Okay, we're almost done. My last section is pretty short. Okay, and the last section is knowledge. Okay, what is the? I'm going to mention 3 groups of knowledge. Having heard what we heard so far, 3 types of knowledge that go into making these decisions. And the first is obviously it's halacha. Okay, there's a whole slew of types of dinim that go into making these decisions. We mentioned different parts that relate to bugs and possible halav and taruvas and hagols, kalim and bishalakim and chalav and stam yain and all the little bits of Hilchos Pesach. The 2 of us just dealt with a Hilchos Pesach, involved Hilchos Pesach Shiloh for a company, Yotzim and Atami, different little things like that all over the place. That of course, that's the bedrock of our hashgacha is what the din is. Okay, so we have to understand what the din is and know what something is. Okay. Next, you got to know how do you make food. Okay, what does it take? What does it take to make alcohol and vinegar and cheese? Why do I care? Well, all of those things you understand could be treif. If making vinegar could be made from wine, then what does it take to make vinegar? What's the byproduct of making vinegar? Well, I'm saying you have to think about all these things. What comes out of what is lactose and what does that do with making cheese? To me to understand is lactose sensitive or is it not sensitive? So you need to understand how the food is. How do you make that food in order to know is it a question or is it not a question? What's going on with it? Okay. Processing aids like enzymes and antifoams and catalysts that go into making a food that are not listed, and it's not. If you look at the ingredients, you just imagine. I mentioned to you before the potato dices. They have an antifoam in them. They probably have an antifoam in them. Okay, so when you think, is it kosher? Well, what about the things that are in there that are, so to speak, hidden, that are not really supposed to be in there? Okay. What about the equipment? Okay? In this, I'm not talking about what I'm going to next talk about sharing equipment. I'm talking about is what's a retard? Okay? Well, what is a drum dryer and a heat exchanger and a distillation column or a homogenizer? So just understanding those kalim makes a difference to knowing what's going on in foods. Just to understand how they play a role and what they mean for all kinds of foods. And then of course we have mentioned before about sharing equipment. Okay, why is it that orange juice and milk are bottled in the same plant, and grape juice and apple juice are bottled in the same plant, but nobody bottles grape juice and milk in the same plant? Okay, I don't mean never, but essentially those don't go together. What's the reason for that? Why does that work like that? Why is it that coconut oil is more likely to be made with animal fat in the same equipment?
You don't need bottle, you need making it. I know companies bottle grape juice faster. Getting grape juice and bottle. You talking about making grape juice.
Bottle grape juice and bottle fresh milk? Okay, that's not common together. They may bottle grape drink. Bottle grape juice is not it's not the same thing. Grape juice and grape juice.
Not very many companies, the dairies that do milk, not very companies do natural juices. Companies do a lot of drinking, a lot of
but lots of places that do milk will do orange juice. Okay, but they're not so likely to find one doing apple juice. Milk and apple juice are not going to be made in the same place. But there's a reason for that. There's a reason why they're not. There's a reason why corn oil and canola oil would be in the same plant, but corn oil and animal fat are not so likely to go together.
Why apple juice and milk won't be made the same?
I'll explain to you afterwards. Okay? So, I'm just pointing out, understanding what's going on, how the food is made, plays a role in figuring out where the chashashas are. Okay, what is a possibility or not a chashash? Okay, efficiencies. Okay, companies, of course, love to be efficient. They want to return condensate. They want to regenerate their heat. They use big houses and vapor scrubbers. Okay, these are all what?
Cow water.
Cow water is from a. Yeah, okay. I didn't put that on my notes here, but yes, that's a distillation. That's saving the water from that evaporation. So all that, these are things where efficiency is driving a company to do something that potentially has a kashrus issue. And last is preservation. Okay, if you make food and it spoils, it's not worth anything. Okay, so you need to pickle food or pasteurize it or fill it hot, which plays a role. Again, in figuring out is there or is not a chashash, understanding how you preserve the food or why you preserve the food or what's done with it makes a difference to figuring out which are chashashas. And the very last thing is chemistry and food science. Okay? If you want, ethanol and ethylene are not the same thing. Okay? They sound pretty similar. Ethanol and ethylene, okay, but one is made from food and one is made from petroleum. Okay, well, what does that mean? How do we know that ethanol is this and ethylene is not that? Okay, well, that's an element of like chemistry, and then there's other food science that relates to this. That connects to chemistry. This is something where, by and large, the people who make these decisions, have by and large, learned this. I could use the word on the job, or taken a class here and there. It's something where we could use. More formal training would be definitely valuable. There are people who have been formally trained, who have degrees, etc., to be formally trained. It's easier to train a rabbi to be a chemist than to teach a chemist to be a rabbi. But there's definitely value in that. It's important because it makes a difference in making the decisions, and it's something we could do better.